Welcome. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Welcome to the TA webinar for publishers participating in the June 2020 Texas Resource Review Cycle. My name is Melissa Lautenschlager. I'm the Director of Instructional Materials and Implementation. And also with me today is Amy Williams, the Director of Review and Adoption, who will be here to answer some questions about TPG or TEKs correlations. Today's webinar is focused on discussing the types of product components eligible for review. This is based on many questions we have in the difference between proclamation and understanding what quality reviewers will be looking at. We'll also describe the optional items publishers may submit and provide some guidance and examples of these optional items. And then we'll have an opportunity to return to correlation documents with Amy Williams here to help answer. And throughout the webinar, we'll be able to respond to questions that you may have. To get us started, I'd like to just talk first about product components. And so when we're asking for publishers to provide access to all components of a product that typically comes from with a base package, what we're talking about or defining as the base package is the version of materials that contains the most basic components of the product, in which every package would have those materials. So you may have a basic package and then have like a platinum package. We're talking about the basic package and understanding all of the components that come with it. We want to have quality reviewers have access to all those components so they can do a very comprehensive review of your materials. In looking at this, we're looking at product components should include things like the student edition or materials, student books, additional books that might come with the purchase. I'll talk a little bit more about not all of those, but things like an example of a decodable book or some stories that might come with them. We do not need all the material, all those books, but having a sampling that would come with a typical base package would be important for reviewers to understand. Also a teacher edition or a teacher guide that when you purchase the materials, it would come with that. Access to any kind of assessments and progress monitoring tools to better understand how progress can be monitored using your product, if that's applicable. Any research lists that are freely available for any district access. And then also providing a comprehensive book list is very helpful, especially when we're looking at literacy components. What you should not include are things like intervention workbooks or ancillaries that are purchased separately. You should not include all decodable books that come with a purchase. Just having a sampling should be sufficient. And then all the manipulatives that may come, especially with our pre-kindergarten systems. Having a comprehensive list might be important, but not having access to the actual manipulatives is fine. And not including sales or marketing materials. The next part that I wanted to discuss with you is about the optional items. So when publishers have this opportunity to provide materials that provide review teams guidance in understanding the product, there are 3 optional items that a publisher may submit for this purpose. They're the checklist of minimum expectations that really is intended to help guide reviewers in understanding the design and organization of a product. The orientation video, this should be a thorough overview of how best to navigate the components. And then the third is the quality rubric correlations that were sent out last Friday. These are where a publisher might provide examples of evidence that best represents how the product meets the indicators. A publisher may submit all 3 of these or any combination. This is an optional component and not part of the requirement. I'm going to go into each one individually and share some suggested guidance as well as provide some additional examples. The first is a checklist of minimum expectations. In this checklist, publishers may create a checklist in their desired format. We are not creating a template for you. You can create your own design, either Word, PDF, and submit it to TEA for approval. We do review prior to sending to the independent review teams to ensure that there isn't any marketing materials and if we have any additional questions. The checklist should outline all components of the product. So what should reviewers be looking at, and only include materials that come with that base package and or are freely available. So for example, freely available might mean that you have a research list that you house on your website that you would like people to look at, but doesn't come as a print component or digital as a package, but is freely accessible. On the screen, you can see an example of what a checklist could look like. Please be very specific in telling reviewers of what they would like, you would like them to look at to ensure that they understand the comprehensive nature of your product so that they're able to dig in very deeply. They spend many hours reviewing, and this helps to orient them and understand the product better. The second optional item is this orientation video. The video, you can create the video in a format that you select. And this again is submitted to TA for approval before we send it on to the review teams. Our suggestions to you are to describe the research-based reasoning of materials organization so that it's individuals can understand why it is designed or laid out in a certain way, and then really focus on the most nuanced, complex, or hard to navigate aspects of the product. I'm going to take a minute just to show you an example of this. I'm going to switch over, so please be patient. And that we're going to look at our example of a review of a video that was submitted. I'll just show you a little bit, but you can have access. Please let me know if you can hear the sound okay in the chat as I turn this on. This video is intended to show you how to access and use the digital version of Springboard ELA. Quick pause before I continue. Can you hear the sound? To TEKs, ELA, as was guided to you by the TRR team. Log in using your TRR account. Page on this screen, you'll find a getting started guide that proceeds using the digital tools. A link to our digital reviewers guide that explains each of the features and components of Springboard ELA, and information about our professional guide. Log in, you should land on the teacher dashboard. This teacher dashboard contains a number of components, but for our purposes and the purpose of the review, I will focus on 4 key components: the bookshelf, teacher resources, assessment, and sync. Let's start with the bookshelf. The bookshelf contains all the materials a teacher. I'm going to pause the sound because I'm hearing that it's a little bit difficult to hear on here. What I will walk you through on the sound part of this is that this particular publisher went through and highlighted different aspects of the product. I'm going to skip ahead just a minute. And when they went through different components, they also shared what navigation tools. So if you can see where my pointer is, they walk through the different navigations. I will encourage you after this, when we post the video and send the Adobe file out, the PDF file, you can watch the video on your own. So I apologize for the sound being difficult. Materials that are included with purchase. Each of the components that are received with purchase, as well as our design and philosophical approach to instruction. Information about instructional vision was pretty key. SAT and SAT, teacher edition features. Some arrows in the top right hand side, or at the bottom it says Next. Using the table of contents in the left hand side of your screen. This navigation includes a table of contents, a teacher map, organizations, a search bar, and class copy. Because this is a demo account, we'll go over the class copy. You can see all sections of the materials in the introductory section. And 1, 2. I will pause there. What I wanted to share with you is that on this video, you have an opportunity to explain different components on your specific digital site, or looking through a printed materials showing even a PDF file of what to look for, explaining the outline of your product, and being able to explain how, especially on a digital product, to find different components. Again, we will send this out, so you will be able to watch the video on your own. This was a sample video that was sent by a publisher during the last review cycle. So I apologize for the quality of there, but I will share with you that the important thing is that it's not intended to be a professional video that you are necessarily publishing on your websites. The intention here is to be direct to our quality reviewers and understanding how to orient themselves and utilize your product to find different components. The third publisher created optional item that can be submitted is the quality rubric correlation. On Friday, we sent out the different correlation documents. You should select the one for which your product is intended. So if you're a pre-K, have a pre-kindergarten systems product, please use the pre-K. If you submitted for foundational literacy, please use the foundational literacy and the math. The intention of the correlation document is to provide guidance and a template for you to record the evidence and examples of where to find in your materials a strong example of where the indicator is met. The example on the page is showing, for example, this particular product was giving some guidance on where they felt like this indicator, which includes assessment and guidance for teachers and administrators for progress monitoring. Please notice they shared exact locations and information to guide the reviewers. As a note, reviewers are not required to use these correlations in their final reports, but this is a process that helps to assure quality in all of our reports being published. It is important to provide as much clarity and guidance here. Because this is an optional component, you are not required to do this, but it is suggested to help to identify and provide your specific understanding of where your product meets the indicator. I'm going to answer just a couple questions that have come through, and then we'll move on to some timelines. Yep, the webinar, we will post it on our website and send a link out. I have a question about futures submissions. Yes, we will have a fall submission, and then we do not continuous cycles, but we do cycles throughout the year, and we'll be publishing an application for the next cycle this summer. I have a question about sending the URL link in the sample we provided I think that's for the video. If you're referring to the video, that is up to you. We also have had people send us a Dropbox file in which they were able to send that. I do want to mention about the component list in just a minute, but you can sell a URL link for a video. If we submitted documents to TEA for the state review, those correlations are not the same as the quality rubric correlations. If you're referring to the alignment correlation documents for TEKs and they were sent as part of the proclamation, yes, we already have those. That would only be in this case for pre-kindergarten systems, or if you were previously part of the math state adoption. I do know some people are getting feedback on preliminary correlations. We submitted those to the team to review. You should be receiving those shortly. And then a question about, for quality rubric correlations, how many maximum minimum examples should be provided for each entry? Our suggestion is that you provide 1 to 3 examples that clearly indicate are for that indicator and are strong evidence. You are allowed to submit more. However, again, I would focus more on 1 to 3 quality to ensure that there is strong evidence examples. Can the video be a webinar? Absolutely. You can put together a webinar and record that. It has to be a pre-recorded to send to the reviewers. One component that I'd like to just share with you is for products that are print only, if you would prefer to send PDF files in something such as a Dropbox folder, we would be able to take those. We understand and hope you do as well that during the current situation, we will not be able to bring reviewers together in person, and therefore most of our reviews take place virtually. Having access to PDF files would be an excellent solution in lieu of sending physical copies for the quality review. Is there a word limit on the rubric explanation? We don't have a word limit. However, please remember to use the example evidence and point people to the location rather than copying the information directly into the cell. For the next requirements that are coming up, just as a reminder, on May 15th, we are looking for the logos, images, websites, social media. This is really intended so that we can publish it on our product pages found on the texasresourcereview.org site. And we are looking for product information due. That's our cost, those cost sheets, the additional language, the professional learning, and the tech specs. Those documents, if you please send those back by May 15th. And if you have additional questions, sending those to our mailbox. Then for the TEKs and ELPs or TPG correlations, sending those for pre-K and math. We did move the foundational literacy TEKs correlation out to May 29th, given the delay in sending you the final templates. And then on June 1st, the optional documents that we just discussed today, the checklist, the video, and the rubric correlations are due by June 1st. And then that print materials are due for pre-K and foundational literacy. Again, if you would like to submit a PDF file for your print materials instead of sending physical copies, we can take those, and those will be only used during the review process, and then we would delete them. One more time, just if you've already submitted your correlations to TEA in response to the proclamation, you are not required to do additional TEKs and ELPs. We work directly with the review and adoption team for that component of the process. Before we jump into questions you may have regarding TPG or TEKs and ELPs alignment, just a reminder that you were sent those correlation instruments, and the purpose is to have citations identify one specific example of content that covers one element. This component is a little different than the rubric correlations in that we have state review panels that go through and determine whether that specific correlation is or is not approved and meets that TPG, TEK, or ELP. This is different than the rubric correlation, in which the rubric correlation is something that the reviewers reference, but they are not actually approving or not approving your evidence provided. I'm going to stop for questions for this first component. If you could hold on correlations for TEKs, TPG, and ELPs, I'll let Amy answer those questions in just a moment. I do have a couple more questions that have come through. For the 1 to 3 examples, yeah, so let's talk about correlations in 2 places. We have the TEKs and ELPs, or the TPG, that is the actual standards correlation. That is the template where we sent out earlier, where you would go through and that has the standards listed on it. That one you only need to provide 1 example per breakout, and Amy will go through that. The other document that was sent out on Friday, May 1st, was the rubric correlation, and that actually has the indicators from the quality rubrics. This is an optional item that you may submit, and we encourage you to provide 1 to 3 examples for the correlations to help illustrate evidence of where the indicators are met. I have another question about certain materials like catalogs explain how the components are used. My suggestion to you is we would not be able to accept a catalog. However, if you do have information that is provided about a list of the products, putting that in the checklist would be my suggestion rather than the catalog. If you do send physical samples, you will need to send 5. This is for the quality reviews. We will need 5 per product, and I can send out the address because this is done by a third party, the reviews, so we'll send that separately. If you don't send PDFs for panelists, how many sets? That would be 5, and I will be sending a follow-up to the publishers that have physical copies only. I will be sending to those that have print copies only of the address for the physical copies. Yes, confirming that the component list is the same as the price information PDF, that is correct. For the product cost form, do we fill out for the whole program cost? Please provide for the whole program cost. If you would like to also submit a list of ancillary materials that can be purchased separately, we can publish that on our site, but we're looking for the whole program cost. I'm going to now turn over the webinar to Amy, and she's going to talk more about the TEKs, ELPs, and TPG correlations.
Thanks, Melissa. Do you mind if I share my screen?
No, I'll pause.
Okay. Perfect. Does that look right?
It does.
Okay, good. All right, great. So as Melissa said, I'm going to talk specifically about the TPG or TEKs and ELPs correlation. So I'm going to ask you to switch gears. I know it's confusing because we're using the word correlations to describe both your alignment to the quality rubric and your alignment to the state standards. So in this instance, I'm just talking about alignment to the state standards. And why can I not get it to advance? Uh-oh. Okay, so you should have received the blank Excel correlation tool that looks similar to this. And it's very important that you don't modify these templates in any way other than to add your citations. I know that it's tempting to convert it to a Google Sheet or upload it to the OneDrive so that more than one person can work on it at a time, but that actually causes lots of trouble once you return that to us and we convert it to the evaluation instrument for the reviewers. So it's important that you just open it in Excel and work on it directly in there. We use very specific terms to describe the work. Breakouts are the individual elements of a standard. Citations are a publisher's specific reference to content that covers those breakouts. And correlations are all of a publisher's citations for a specific subject area and course or grade level. When correlating to the TEKs and TPG, you must provide two different types of citations for each breakout, a narrative citation and an activity citation. And when we say narrative citation, we're talking about the content that provides an opportunity for the students to learn a concept or skill, or for the teacher to teach that concept or skill. And when we say activity citation, we're talking about content that provides an opportunity for the student to demonstrate the knowledge or practice the skill. You only need one acceptable narrative citation and one acceptable activity citation, but you may provide up to 3 additional citations from the content intended for the students. You may also provide up to 5 citations for the content intended for the teacher. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about a good strategy for how to order your citations. The reviewers use the correlations you provide as a roadmap when they're determining the product's alignment to the standards. So it's very important that you take your time and follow the instructions that we provide when you're completing the correlation document. You shouldn't rush through it. Instead, take your time and make sure that your citations are easy to understand and accurate. We understand that you may address the breakouts in several different places, but for the purposes of the correlation document, you should select the best, most closely aligned content for your citations. And if you're going to provide multiple citations for a single breakout, list your strongest citations first. You want those to be the first ones that the reviewers look at. The TEKs or TPG percentage is calculated based on the total number of student expectations or end-of-year outcomes that are addressed. An SE or outcome cannot be partially addressed, so every breakout for an SE or outcome must be addressed in order for you to get credit for that standard. The process for correlating to the ELPS is very similar. However, there are a few differences. For example, you don't have to distinguish between narrative and activity citations for the ELPS. Because of this, you have fewer rows for each breakout on the ELPS correlation template. You actually have 4 instead of 5. And the reviewers only need to accept 1 citation for each of those breakouts in order for you to get credit. So at this point, I'm going to open the floor to you guys to see what sort of questions you have. Let me see what you've already sent out. For the standards correlation, you said 1 example is required. Does that mean 1 each of the teacher or student, or just choose between the 2? So for each of the white rows on your correlation document, that's the citations from your student material. You need 1 acceptable narrative citation and 1 acceptable activity citation. You can also provide citations in the peach rows, which are from the teacher material. If we're talking about ELPS correlations, then you do only need 1 citation, period. Whether it's narrative or activity, you don't distinguish between the 2. Did you previously send out written notification about the deadline extension for foundational literacy correlations. Melissa, I'm going to ask you to answer that one. I believe that you sent that email.
I did. I sent that we would be extending it given that our correlations were sent out late.
Perfect. The next question, I know you said just one correlation per breakout. Just want to confirm that since the number of blanks on the form per breakout was much more. Another way of asking is how many examples of correlation per student and teacher do we have to have per TEKs, breakout, or else? So for the TEKs or TPG, again, you have to have one narrative and one activity citation per breakout. Then you can provide up to 3 additional examples from the student material, and those can be narrative or activity or a mixture of both. And for the else, you just need one citation, one acceptable citation per breakout, but you can provide up to 3 additional examples. What other questions do you have? I have seen, I just want to make sure it was clear. If you are already participating in Proclamation 2021, or we're reviewing your adopted materials, we're going to use the correlations to the standards that you already provided. So we're not asking for any additional standards correlations. The only additional correlation is the optional rubric correlation. The form that I just showed, the standards correlation is not optional. Melissa, am I missing any questions?
I think give me 1 second. I'm trying to.
Can you clarify the page number column in the TEK standard correlation spreadsheet? Is that to be used, for example, if we have a teacher guide that covers multiple standards to identify which page addresses the standard? Let me see if I can go backwards in my, all right, so you should see a screenshot of the correlation document, and that's a great question. What we're looking for is a very specific example. So even if you cover the standard in multiple places, we want you to find a place that the reviewer could point to on a page and say, yes, the standard's covered here. And so you would provide the specific page or page range. And when we say range, we're talking about a handful of pages, not like chapter 5, the whole chapter. And understand that these reviewers are educators, and so they recognize that the content builds throughout the chapter, and so it may not be completely covered on the page that you reference, but that's where the bulk of it lives. And then the specific location is within that page or set of pages, which section or heading should they look for to identify the content that you're referencing. If it's a digital program, then you can provide a hyperlink that takes us straight to the content. What if the activity and narrative happen in the same lesson? That's completely normal. It's acceptable to provide identical citations for multiple breakouts. And also for a narrative and an activity, but you still have to provide that citation on both the narrative and activity rows in order to get credit. And then remember that the reviewers are going to be asking those same questions that I showed earlier here. For the narrative, they're going to ask if that content provides an opportunity for the student to learn or the teacher to teach the skill or knowledge. And for the activity citation, they're going to be looking for an opportunity for the student to demonstrate the knowledge or practice the skill. And so if they can answer yes to one of those narrative questions and one of those activity questions for that content, then that's acceptable. To clarify the page number question, we could use one document to cover multiple standards, provided we list the specific pages and locations within those pages alongside our citation. So I think I'm understanding your question. You could use one piece of content to cover multiple standards, and you'll just need to be clear where, so the specific page and section of that content that you're referencing for that citation. These are good questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah, just to clarify again, what Amy is talking about right now, which is our standards, this is about how well is the product aligned to the standards, which results in a percentage. That is a required document that all products must go through. The document that is broken with the rubric, the indicators in the rubric and the guidance for quality, that is an optional item in which publishers can send to our review teams. So standards, mandatory, required, rubric, correlation, optional. I had a question about if you have products that are not digital or print, for example, manipulatives, again, you can also send us an additional materials list if you like. We also have the ability to link directly to your site. That's why we're asking for URLs and logos to be able to put on the product page, but we're happy to provide a list that provides easy access to users and understanding your cost breakdown. The question about what has already been submitted from pre-K. So pre-K products as part of the proclamation, if you sent in a physical copy, that is for, Amy, and correct me if I say this incorrectly, that is for people to view products. They can come to TEA, well, not right now, but they can typically come to TEA and view a product that is under consideration. For us to be able to review your product, we will have to have physical copies for each of the reviewers.
That is correct. I do see a question about, is there a good example we could look at for correlations? We do have correlation training posted to the publisher portal on the instructional materials homepage, and you could view the entire correlations training that will include some examples, and we'll make sure to send a link or post a link to that.
We had a question about percentage of alignment to the standards that are the mandatory standards. In a proclamation, if you are part of the proclamation, to be on this, be considered for the state adoption list, you must have 50% or greater. We will publish what your standards correlation is for especially things like the foundational literacy products. There is not a requirement for it being published. We will publish what it is.
I see another question about the number of citations in the white rows versus the peach rows. So I'm gonna go back to that so you can see it. And whether or not the peach rows are optional. And so the way that it will work, assuming that there are white rows, because we do have some standards in pre-K that were determined not necessarily appropriate for inclusion in student materials. But if you have white and peach rows, like the example seen here, yes, as long as you've entered acceptable citations in the white rows, you don't have to enter citations in the peach rows. And the logic behind that is that all the student material is also available to the teacher. So if you've covered content in the student material, we consider it covered for the teacher as well. That doesn't work in reverse. So if you only provided citations in the peach rows and skipped the white rows, that would not be considered addressed in the student material, because students typically don't have access to the teacher-only materials. That was a good question.
There's a lot of questions about the pre-K materials. I want to stress that the situation right now does not allow for us to yet be able to bring together teams of reviewers. Amy and I are working diligently to find a strong solution in which we're not requesting more materials from publishers than are needed. Currently to share, there are, that's why for the quality reviews, we're providing this option of submitting PDF files of your print materials. We really are working hard to find a strong solution here, given the current situation. To share, typically at the state review, if you have physical only materials, I'll let Amy answer how many. For the quality review, we would need 5 total. Again, we're working, and we'll set up some times to talk to individual publishers in this situation. We're trying to find a strong solution given our current circumstances.
Yes, we do, for the Proclamation 2021 publishers, we do still need 5 hard copy or final format samples for that review. But as Melissa said, we're still working out the logistics, and we'll be reaching out to you guys individually to discuss possible solutions. I do have another question related to a lesson being used to demonstrate alignment to a standard and then reused or expanded upon to cover additional breakouts. You absolutely can use the same lesson to cover multiple breakouts. As in any good instruction, you know, you layer your content and you address the standards repeatedly so that students are building on the concepts that you're teaching. So we don't expect that these breakout documents guide instruction in any way. This is just a tool for us to verify that every element of an expectation, a student expectation, is covered in instructional material. It's not how the material is actually taught in the classroom. How will we know which standards were deemed inappropriate for pre-K? The correlation document that you received already has that indicated. When you don't need to provide citations from your student material, those will have been grayed out. So you won't even be able to make entries in those white rows when that standard was determined inappropriate for inclusion in student materials. Is there a reason why the breakout alignment document is to the older version of the TEKs with the full breakouts? I'm going to need a little more information on that question. I'm not quite sure what that's referring to.
You're welcome to post in there or to send us an email directly to better understand the specificity of that question.
Melissa, I see a question about, is there an example on how to fill the quality rubric?
Oh, like an actual Excel example?
They're speaking specifically of like best ways to format the text in the cells, such as using bullets.
I can try to put something together with the follow-up. The question about, is this entire review voluntary? That is not quite a simple answer. The answer is, if you submit to proclamation, you are required to go through a quality review. Submitting to proclamation is a voluntary experience. We also do have a commissioner's rule in which, if you are a foundational literacy product, and it's any product where districts have requested, we have more than 10% of districts in the state of Texas request review, then that triggers the Texas Resource Quality Review. That may not be super clear, but just sharing that if you are submitting for proclamation, which is a voluntary experience, you will also be reviewed for quality. And then if we do have 10% or more of all districts in Texas require a review, we can also review materials.
Well, it looks like the questions are slowing down. If you do have additional questions specifically about the TEKs or TPG correlations, then you can send those to review.adoption@tea.texas.gov. Questions about any other aspect of the quality review would go to the email address that Melissa shared earlier.
Texas Resource Review at tea.texas.gov. Our teams work together, and therefore we are able to share information. We'll continue to update regarding the pre-K physical copies, and we're reaching out to publishers shortly to discuss.
I did get some additional information about the original question about the versions of the breakouts. And this is going to be difficult to answer in a way that will make sense for the entire audience, but essentially it looks like we're talking about one of the long standards in grade 2 English Language Arts and Reading, demonstrate and apply phonetic knowledge by, and then it listed 7 different ways that happened. That was all part of the standard itself, the student expectation. The breakouts take B1 and separate those into its component parts, as well as, you know, each of the subsequent Romanettes, which is what results in 50 breakouts. So there's a difference between the student expectation and the breakouts of the student expectation, which are really just the same exact words broken into component parts.
We'll stay on just for a few more minutes if there's any additional questions. If we were unable to answer your question, please email us. But thank you for attending today, and continue to send your questions forward to us, and we'll respond as quickly as we can. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Amy.
Yes, thanks.
We'll post the recording by the end of the week, but I will send a PDF attachment to the attendees today to make sure that you can also watch the orientation video example. Thank you. Have a nice day.